I see no good reason to think that human beings are the foundation of objective moral value. Consider the following dilemma. Either God exists or he doesn't. Now, if God exists, there's no good reason to think that human beings are the foundation of objective moral value. For how do you know that God is not the foundation of value, as many Christians maintain? That human beings are of value because they're created in the personal image of God. Hence, if God exists, there's no good reason to think humanism is true. Suppose then that God does not exist. There's still no good reason to think that humanism is true. For the question at once arises, why should we regard human beings as the foundation of objective moral value? Once you get rid of God, who's to say where values come from, or whether they objectively exist at all? On the atheistic view, moral values are just the byproducts of socio-biological evolution. Philosopher of science Michael Roos writes, "The position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, 'Love thy neighbor as thyself,' they think they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory." Now, I think that Professor Davis basically agrees with this viewpoint. In his paper on discourse ethics, he states that the kind of moral realism he believes in, and I quote, has nothing to do with postulating a Platonic realm of queer value objects. One has only to be realist about agents' needs and interests. In other words, moral values are in essence just human inventions, what humans want and need to fulfill their desires. But there's no reason to think that human beings and their needs are in some way special or objectively valuable. But if that is the case, then humanism goes out the window along with theism, for then human beings are of no objective moral value. Friedrich Nietzsche, the great atheist of the last century who proclaimed the death of God, understood this all too well. "The end of Christianity," wrote Nietzsche, "means the advent of nihilism, that is to say, the destruction of all meaning and value in life. Only the Superman, who is able to live beyond good and evil, will acquire mastery in the coming age of nihilism, which stands already at the door." I think that the specter of Friedrich Nietzsche must haunt every humanist. For if there is no God, then why wouldn't nihilism be true? Now, let's be very careful here. The question here is not, must we believe in God in order to live moral lives? I'm not saying that we must. Nor is the question, can we recognize objective moral values without believing in God? Of course we can. Nor is the question, can we formulate a coherent system of ethics without reference to God? I'd say, sure you can, once you make the crucial assumption that human beings have objective moral value. But that assumption is precisely the question. In the absence of God, I don't see any reason to think that the herd morality evolved by Homo sapiens is objectively true. After all, if there is no God, then what's so special about human beings? They're just accidental byproducts of nature which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe, and which are doomed to perish individually and collectively in a relatively short time. On the atheistic view, some actions, say rape, may not be socially advantageous, and so in the course of human evolution has become taboo. But that does absolutely nothing to prove that rape is really wrong. If you can escape the social consequences, there's nothing really wrong with raping someone. Thus, if God does not exist, there is no absolute standard of right and wrong which imposes itself on our conscience. One might as well become a nihilist or a hedonist, and if you can get away with it, just live for pleasure. But I can't see any reason to make this leap of faith and become a humanist. In this sense, humanism is a faith commitment to the ultimate value of human beings in an atheistic world. But I don't see any reason at all to think that this faith commitment is true. And here I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Davis's comments on the nature of humanism as a religion held by faith. If God exists, there's no good reason to think that humanism is true. And if God does not exist, there's no good reason to think that humanism is true. Now, since either God exists or he doesn't, it follows logically that there's no good reason to think that humanism is true. So, we've seen two fatal weaknesses in the humanist's position. First, there's no good reason to think that atheism is true. And second, there's no good reason to think that human beings are the foundation of objective moral value. And therefore, I think we can safely conclude my first contention that there are no good reasons to think that humanism is true.